Okay, so welcome to our webinar. Oh, Holly's got some more people joining. Good. Welcome to our webinar about National Board Component 2, which is the differentiation and instruction component. Because we had actually said in here, don't use your camera, but don't listen to this because we have such a small group that we're encouraging you all to keep your cameras on. And we encourage you to speak at any time, but if you're not talking, try to keep your microphone muted because sometimes it can give us feedback if the microphones are left open. And if I'm getting feedback, I'll just start muting people, but you can unmute yourself anytime if you have things you want to say. If you haven't found the chat box yet, if you look at there's like a toolbar that has some choices on it, and one of those choices should be a chat box. And if you don't see chat box, it might be listed where there's like more and 3 dots. And when you click on that, it'll have a chat box that you can open up and leave it open and detach it. You can move that around if it's in your way of what you want to see or change the size of it. And in the chat box, you can send chats to the whole group, or you can send it to individual people if you don't want everyone to see what you're asking or saying. You can also mute yourself using that toolbar, or you can hover over your picture, and there should be a mute option when you look at your picture of what's showing on your screen. And it looks like we're getting some more people to join, which is great. So it says, I'm just going to repeat that you don't have to, you can use your camera. It doesn't look like we're going to have enough people that the cameras will be a problem. So that makes it a little easier for us to gauge how we're doing and what your questions are. So my name is Suzanne Farmer, and I'm a board certified teacher. I certified in 2004 when I was teaching preschool. And my background is heavily preschool and kindergarten, and then math intervention for a while. So I've renewed my board certification, and right now I'm a teacher on leave from the Danville Independent Schools. And I work on a grant called the Kentucky Network to Transform Teaching, which is a grant with the National Board. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Education. And Kentucky is one of 10 sites that has the grant. And one part of that work is supporting people through board certification, but really it's a lot more about improving teaching and supporting all teachers to improve their practice using what we know through the process of board certification. Holly, you're muted.
Hi, I'm Holly Bloodworth. I am a National Board Certified Teacher. I'm the president of the Kentucky NBCT Network. I work with Suzanne on different aspects of the grant as the teacher advisor for that group. And I am working with several different candidates for candidate support. So just doing a lot of different things with National Board Certification. And I have with me a new friend that I'm just meeting today. We are here at the Paducah KEA office for a regional cohort that meets once a month. And I was here to help a little bit with that and to invite any of the people that we're working on Component 2 to join us here on this webinar. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Leslie Bizzle. I'm working on Component 2. I'm a middle school math teacher.
Oh, I talked
in
to
the
you by
elementary
the phone,
situation.
haven't I?
Yes, a lot.
Yes, okay.
Lots.
Yes. Nice to meet you in person.
I know, Shan, you've told us a little bit about yourself, but do you mind to just tell the group what you're...
Teach the upper...
You might need to start again. You were muted.
Oh, I am a high school art teacher at McCracken County High School. I teach the advanced level classes, and I'm also working on Component 2 right now. And we have a National Board Academy that our district is paying for. So this component was paid for by our Board of Education. And we also have a meeting once a month with Crystal Culp, which I'm sure you guys know her. And she sort of helps us along. So as I said, I feel pretty confident about the writing portion, but I think from the examples I've looked at, my scope is a lot broader than a lot of the other ones I've looked at. And then no one else in my group is in art. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say.
All right, Courtney, do you mind to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your area?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Courtney Keller, and I'm currently working on component 2, 3, and 4 of my national board certification. And I'm working on my early English language arts, so 11 to 15.
All right, Sammy. Okay, she's got it in the chat box, and you can feel free to do that if you don't want to grab the mic. Sammy's got no voice. She's high school science teacher and also doing 2, 3, and 4. Sammy, where are you located?
Kenton County. Okay.
Heather?
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm in Fort Thomas Independent Schools in Northern Kentucky. I'm exceptional needs specialist for severe to moderate disabilities at the elementary level currently.
Who have we not heard from?
Did we do Amy? Yes. I have Amy, Shand, Courtney. No, wait, did we do Amy?
I don't remember.
Okay, I wrote down Amy, but it was Courtney.
Hi guys, I'm Amy Lepore. I teach at Marshall County High School. I'm currently working on component 3, but I'm very interested in component 2 because I know there's some changes, and nobody at my school who's national board certified they had to go through that one. It's all different. So I'm a little confused and looking forward to what you had to say.
Great. We've got a lot of Western Kentucky representation.
Absolutely. And then, a few up north a little bit too. So, but that's obvious. So Holly and Crystal are really great about getting the word out and doing candidate support out west. So that shows. We wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer that we have done our best to make sense of all of the different sets of directions because they can be a little different, as Shand brought up with art. And that each area has got a little bit of nuance to things like the time span and the kind of samples and how many students and things. So we do want to make sure that you understand if you have any questions to really refer to the documents for your area. And the ultimate place for answers is to call 1-800-22-TEACH, or if you prefer to get your answers in writing, the MBPTS candidate support at pearson.com for answers. Because we feel pretty confident about most things, but there are times when we're going to say you probably ought to reach out. So if they tell you something different than what we say, they win. So they're always the right answer.
And if they tell you something different, tell us so we learn too.
Yes, absolutely. So anytime that we have meetings through our work with the National Board in this grant, we really try to bucket our norms and some big ideas that resonate with teachers and classrooms, and equity, service, community growth, results, reflection, and levity. And it's a little harder to make this fun and funny, but we will try to not be too serious through this learning. And really, I know that you all want results as you're facing a deadline, and it's important for you to be able to have clear next steps. So we're going to do our best to help you with what we think are some really practical relevant examples with your components. And I appreciate you all already taking some risks and introducing yourselves and grabbing the mic and talking on camera, because I know that that can be uncomfortable, especially on a Sunday and when you don't know each other and you may not be dressed in your, professional attire. So I appreciate everyone being willing to do that. So before we get started, we wanted to open it up with a question, and you can feel free to grab the mic. You don't need to wait to be called on, or you can type in the chat box if that's a space that you're more comfortable. So because this component is very much about instructional decision making, we wanted to open up with the question about how do you decide what instructional adjustments to make for students?
Okay, I'm going to go first. Is there anybody else talking? Okay. I always start with a pre-assessment to figure out what my baseline is. That always helps me moving forward. This is my 9th year teaching, so I have some sort of preconceived notions that my pre-assessments generally tend to fall along that norm, but I always do it anyway just to kind of see where my individual students fall and what I need to do moving forward. Is that kind of what you're asking? Okay.
I just typed in there formative assessments because for me, that's what I need to do to make sure I understand whether my students are understanding the targets that I'm covering. And so then I can make those adjustments.
And Amy's typed in a couple examples that would fall into that same category of formative assessments with KWL charts, exit slips, and things like that. So, and Sammy's also talked about some formative assessments with observations.
I think for me,
Mhm.
sometimes it's questioning, like as I'm teaching something, just the discussion and asking questions so that I can see, like, just keep your fingers on the pulse of what's going on in your room right then and making little adjustments as you go, going back, saying something a little differently. Kind of, I agree, like watching their faces and how engaged they are, all of those kinds of things too.
And I even think about like paying attention to the strategies kids use, which might also give you some understanding of the sophistication of their understanding. So like just thinking about the way, how long maybe it takes kids to do things and the ways in which they're doing it. So it could be and Sammy's got more things about the types of, are they even doing the homework? Are they answering it correctly? How hard are the higher level questions or basic questions? Like the depth of understanding is really important. And I think that that's also what I was trying to explain. I didn't probably do it very well either, but like this idea of sometimes the observation or the way the student is doing it can also tell you their depth of understanding.
Yeah.
In math, I look a lot at the difference between like if it's just a procedural answer or an answer that shows really comprehension, which I'm sure could be applied to other content as well.
With one of my groups, and I think it depends, I think you probably do it differently for different groups of students. One of my groups, we're doing this really hard text right now, and I have found that I just have to ask them, do you understand this? And they know themselves as learners well enough to know if they are understanding or not. And it's been pretty interesting to kind of let them help me adjust what we're doing, because the text is a pretty difficult text. And they're getting to the point now, they'll just say, wait, I don't understand what's going on. So I think that's really great.
Any other thoughts or comments on this? We're going to dig into this a lot more, obviously, as we go through the component.
I have a sort of getting to know you survey I send to parents and to students at the first of the year. That helps me a lot. And one of the questions on there is, what have your previous art experiences been? So I can look and immediately see, okay, this kid hated middle school art. And then the parents, you know, one of the questions I have for them is, what would you like to see your student improve upon this year? And it usually has nothing to do with art, but that at least gives me a baseline to kind of meet in the middle. And then another thing I would add that might be beneficial to everybody is, probably you guys see this too, where when you get a lot of behavioral flack, that a lot of times it's a student acting out because they don't know how to do the work or are fearful. And that manifests a lot more in art than just about anything else, where a student is embarrassed or doesn't want to try and fail, so they would rather misbehave and, you know, be sent out or whatever. So those are all things that I think about when making adjustments for students.
That's a really helpful example. And it is going to connect a lot to what we'll see in the rubric as well, Shane. Thank you for sharing that. I think your example could easily be applied to anyone's classroom, that it's really important to understand how a student feels about your content or school and the previous experiences that they bring to that, and also including the parents in that is really a great recommendation. So thank you. Other ideas or comments before we move on?
I have used the STAR reports in math, and it'll give you exactly where they're low. Then the RTI teacher can take it from there. It's pretty good.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of assessments. That's good. Mm-hmm.
All right, since our group is pretty small and you all feel pretty comfortable, I think, sharing, if you don't mind to just type in the chat box which stage of the process that you're in with this component, that would be helpful for us. I know, and I've already forgotten which one isn't actually doing it yet this year. I don't know if that was Heather, that you're looking at maybe doing it next year. Somebody had mentioned that, so.
It's all about 4 of them.
So Amy, maybe. Okay.
I need to put my name. Yeah. Component. Sorry.
Just say. Just.
So it looks like of the people that are planning on doing it this year, that you all are somewhere around 3, 4, or 5. And what's great about Amy gathering information is you got a long time to think about these things. So so this is, you guys are all in a good place, I would say, about where you are. So this just helps us a little bit as we move forward. So thank you. In each of the components, the portfolio components, there's a standard flow of the sections that are really helpful to consider before you get started. And we're going to use some of these sections to help us as we go over some strategies and some things that we want to make sure are clear to people. There's always an overview for each of the components. So you have your kind of like your title, your cover page, then there's a table of contents. And the very first thing after that, so it would be on page 1 of your instructions, there's an overview section. And it'll have like component 2 differentiation and instruction, and it has a paragraph there that really gives you the big idea of your component in one paragraph. Then it will list the standards that this specific component is assessing. So in that paragraph, it will say, like it says at the end, the tasks for all components and the rubrics used to assess candidate work have been developed in accordance with the 5 core propositions and the certificate area standards. So we'll be pulling in some of those things during this webinar, but it will list specifically your standards that are being assessed on page 1. And every certificate area has different numbers of standards and different names in their standards. So we can't tell you exactly how many standards that is and exactly which ones they are. You're going to have to look at the ones for your specific area, but we will talk about some general themes that are assessed there. Then on page 3, there should be a section that's called "What do I need to do?" And it has like 3 things bulleted there that it's saying are the things for your certificate area that you're expected to do. And then there's a "What do I need to submit?" section right after that. And then you're going to flip for a little while, and somewhere around page 8, there's a section that's "What to include in your written commentary." And that's the what questions you need to answer. So we're going to talk about each of these as we move along, but I just wanted to kind of give you a general idea about where those are going to fall in your instructions if you have them with you. So the big ideas for this component are knowing your students, which if you were on our Component 4 webinar was a huge theme in Component 4. But knowing your students is a big idea here. Knowing the content and curriculum, your instructional decision making, which we've already talked about a little bit, and your reflective practice. And I just wanted to call your attention to the architecture of accomplished teaching, which is at the beginning of everyone's standards and is another major part of how you are assessed in board certification. It talked about the 5 core propositions in the instructions with the rubric, but the 5 core propositions are super important in and of themselves, but you can see with this graphic how the 5 core propositions interact with instructional decisions, and that your planning, your implementation, and your reflection of your instruction. So the knowledge of students is really what's going to help you to decide who are your students, where are they now, what do they need in order to, what do they need, in what order do they need it, and where should you start. That's also where you're going to set your appropriate goals for these students at this time and in this setting. So then knowing your content in your curriculum is going to help you to really make, implement instruction designed to achieve those goals. And your instructional decision making is going to help you to constantly evaluate that, to make adjustments. And then your reflection is going to help you to decide how well it went or didn't, and then set new goals. So with this cycle, you're going to be going through this cycle and talking through this cycle with each of these students. So this is a process that you're going to want to consider and maybe help you to organize your thinking as you go into your narrative. I'll pause for a minute in case there were any comments or questions on that. Right. So in the "What do I need to do?" section, the big ideas that I noticed that seemed common is your ability to plan. And so you're going to show evidence of your planning and teaching, evidence of your ability to describe, analyze, and evaluate student work, evidence of differentiation of instruction to develop student ability, and evidence of using student work to reflect on your practice. All right, and everyone will have a little bit of different types of evidence that they're expected to submit from the students. However, everyone will have a contextual information sheet that you submit, and in your written commentary, what you're expected to submit are the answers to the questions, which are those in italics in the what to include in your written commentary. Everything that's in italics are questions that you are assessed on answering. Now, one of the strategies that I know we've covered in other webinars around the components is it's super helpful when you're writing your narrative to go ahead and type those questions and leave them in italics in your draft so that you can make sure that you're actually answering each question. And then leave them in there as you have people review and give you feedback so that they know what questions you're expected to answer. And they can say, you know what, this is really interesting, but it's not related to any of these questions. So maybe cut that part. Or I'm not sure you answered this question. I think what they're asking is this, and you're talking about this. And that will really help to make sure that you have clarity. Because if you're including things that are not related to the questions, then it's not like you get bonus points that could be shifted over for the questions you don't answer. You have to address the questions. So stick with facts and just answer the questions that they're asking you to answer. And if you answer them well, you're going to be struggling to fit those in. You won't have room for extra stuff. So then you can go back right before you submit, of course, and take all those questions out. Some people even do, when they're writing it, they'll even like sort of restate it a little bit as they're answering the question so that it's clear that they're answering the question, but that doesn't matter. The assessors are trained to find this information. But you could say, my school setting is yada, yada, yada. When it says, what is your school setting? What are the relevant characteristics of your class? You could say, the relevant characteristics of this class are, feel free to do that if that helps you to make sure that you're answering the questions. And I'm going to mute for a minute in case there's some other, I know Holly spent some time looking at the differences between the prompts and samples for each. So I'll mute for a minute and see if.
I participated in sort of a round robin review, and one of the people in my group sort of just paraphrased the question and made it like a heading. So it wasn't as lengthy, and I felt like that was a really concise way to do it, but I did not do that. I sort of restated the question, and I feel like mine looks messy, and I'm just wondering if you think there's a preferred way, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and there's not a preferred way. Holly, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
I was just going to say, you're going to take, is it the stuff that you're going to take out later?
For her, the one that I read, I don't think she intended to. I think she just sort of said, I can't even remember because hers is like history or something. It was like evidence that students, started at this point. And then it was just like underlined, and then she laid out her evidence. And it looked really tidy. It was more of a bulleted approach, whereas mine's more paragraphical. I don't know if that's a word.
Either way is fine. You can do it bulleted, or you can do it in a paragraph form. I think just whichever one matches you better.
Okay. Of all the ones that I read, I felt like, wow, this looks really, I don't even know if her content was that sharp. It just stands out in my mind as looking really finished.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't worry about that. I would stick with what feels right for you.
So long as the content is there.
Yes.
Okay.
Because they're going to score it, and they are looking for evidence of the things. They're not going to mark you down if something, like if you say something that's not quite right, they don't mark you down. They just look for points to gather up.
Mm-hmm.
So you just want to make sure that you articulate the answers to the questions.
Okay.
And they have a lot of anti-bias training. And part of that, I'm sure, is about like writing styles and about format. It's about like just making sure that, that that if a teacher has a teaching style that may not feel exactly like your style, or a writing style that doesn't feel like your style, you're not scoring them lower because of that, because there's a lot of different ways to prove that you're accomplished, and it can look a lot of different ways. So there's not, in fact, National Board would kind of probably go overboard and say there's absolutely not a preferred way to, like, any type of a lesson or any type of a form, or, you know, they really want to make sure that people have the liberty to demonstrate that they're accomplished in the way that they're comfortable. So, but that's a good question. I think everyone know exceptional needs is one student. We had someone that's exceptional needs. And I think everybody else that's on the call probably has 2 students that they're highlighting. Does that sound right for everyone that's on here? And some of you will have like two samples over time. Some have 3. And then Shan's is a little different because as an art teacher, she's got to do like storyboards that look a little different with some photographs of work. So if there's anyone that's listening to this later, there's also some differences for school counselors. There can be differences in library media science, but really this is a profile to highlight typically 2 students and their work. So this is the component that really focuses on the individual students. I know that if you're an exceptional needs teacher, most of your components, if not all of your components, are really going to focus more on individual students. But in the other certificate areas, we're dealing a lot with groups of students, whole group and small group in the other components. And this is really the place where they're asking you to take a deep dive to look at individuals and how you handle individual students. So part of this is really being able to evaluate individual strengths and needs, to plan and differentiate your instruction for individuals, to analyze and modify your instructional strategies and materials based on ongoing assessment. So you guys did a really nice job talking about a lot of the ways that you do that ongoing assessment. And then one of my favorite explanations that someone has given me about formative assessment, Audrey Harper describes it as, and I'm sure she's probably read this somewhere else, but I think of Audrey when I hear this, but she talks about that formative assessment isn't formative if you're not going to do anything with it. That it really has to impact your instruction and help you to make instructional decisions, or it's not really formative. So, so that's the other piece, is when you're gathering this information, what are you doing with it, and how does that impact what you're going to do next? So if you haven't already been exposed to the What Teachers Should Know and Be Able to Do book, this will be an excellent resource for you in terms of, that can really be a nice addition to your reading, very similar to your certificate area standards. And this can be found on the National Board website. If you click on the 5 core propositions, it's on the left-hand tab when you're on the general homepage. And there's a PDF that is the entire book of this, and it's free for you to download. And this book was recently published. I think it just came out in November or December, maybe December. There used to be a version of this book that was just basically a Word document, and it was written in the 1980s. And what it is an explication of the 5 core propositions. And the 5 core propositions that we've already shown in the Architecture of Accomplished Teaching. What's interesting about that, and you can read a little bit of the history in the preface of the book, is that the 5 core propositions were written before there were ever any board certified teachers. And it's considered education's Hippocratic Oath. So these are basically these agreements that educators make when they choose to serve students and families. So the 5 core propositions were written in the 1980s, and they've never changed. So, but this explication has been updated because things have changed a lot since the 1980s. So the ways that we equitably serve students, there's things that we consider now that we would not have considered in the 1980s. So the explication had not been updated since it was originally created, and this document is a really nice, thoughtful explanation of each of the 5 core props. So what's nice about this book and this document is that the explanations are common for everyone across certificate and discipline areas, so that you can have some common understanding and explanations and conversations with people who are not in your same specialty area, that these are things that all teachers should be able to do. So there's a really nice section about Core Prop 3. There's a subsection that's about assessing student progress. And in that section, there's this quote, and it's pretty lengthy, and there's more said around this idea than what I've typed on this slide, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to read this and think about, to make any comments or thoughts or things that stand out to you about this idea that's captured on this slide. So I can do wait time a really long time. But wanted to give you guys an opportunity to think about, is there anything in this that strikes you, that stands out to you, or is difficult, or that you agree with or disagree with, or oh, that's a really nice thought, Jan. This is how you knew you were ready to start your boards. So do you mean that you felt ready because you were able to balance that, or you wanted to get better at balancing that?
I just realized I was reflecting regularly and making decisions to grow my practice, to strengthen my practice, and I was seeing the results. And I was, kind of mentioning that to my boss after one of my observations. And he was like, you should look at national boards. And I was like, maybe I'll do that. And then they offered the academy, and that made it really worthwhile because I was really fearful to do it by myself. So yeah, I think I was ready. It was good timing. Before, when you're like a new teacher, you're just sort of floundering and trying to figure out what you're teaching and how to teach. And it's really mechanical. And then now it's a lot more intuitive and sort of cyclical, I think.
I think, Amy, you bring up a really good point about any kind of group work instruction and how hard that can be to balance this, especially with like PBL, that can feel really tough. Courtney, I think it is a conflict. And I appreciate that in this paragraph that they actually talk about this being an essential tension, that there is a really hard line that you walk as a teacher between balancing the needs of individuals and balancing the needs of a whole classroom. No, that's so funny. Samuel like typed the exact same thing I think I just said. So, but before I said it, I'm sure. So, because the timing was, but where our minds are in sync here, that this is a really, 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 really hard thing, and I appreciate that this paragraph sort of honors the complexity of how hard this is. I really like that there's this understanding that we kind of take what we know from the group and we can use that to help individuals. But more importantly, I think it's about what do we learn from individuals that then help to inform the group. Because if we're only teaching to the group, we're obviously missing most everyone. That there's not average students. So that it's really a lot about continuing to really keep those individuals at the heart and to have that, what you learn from individuals to drive the group. I know I mentioned that I was a math interventionist for a while. And in that work, I was trained to do math recovery, which to get certified in that work, you have to work one-on-one with students and videotape your instruction with kids one-on-one and then analyze those videotapes with one-on-one instruction. And a lot of people, I think, felt like that's not hard to do one-on-one instruction and that, you know, it's so easy if you just have the one kid. But this was really about micro adjustments and this very fine, like perfect differentiation. And if you can do that and learn a lot and analyze what kids are thinking on an individual level, how much that helps to inform you when you are trying to predict misconceptions for groups and know like what works and what doesn't and how to analyze behaviors better. And I didn't realize how much I was going to learn about how to teach groups of kids by spending some time really analyzing my practice with individuals. But it helped so much. And that to me is the beauty of this component. A lot of people are like, who has the time to do a case study on a kid? And this isn't really realistic to do these case studies where we're really analyzing kids for these certain kids for a certain amount of time. And you almost feel like you're cheating your other kids because you maybe aren't pushing yourself as far with some of these other kids because you don't have to write about them and you don't have to show this, but it is going to improve your instruction for all kids. And this is really allowing yourself to study the individual to get better at teaching all kids, if that makes sense. So, but it is a tension. Thank you for the comments in the chat box. Thank you for staying engaged. So one of the questions I get a lot when I help candidates is if I'm really only talking about these individual students, how do I talk about what I do with groups? And how do I balance, how would I talk about what I did for the whole group? And really, you're focusing on the individual students. But you can address that tension that you have between that individual student and the group and the times where that student's path may be very different than the group and how you're addressing that. But also talk about how what you learn from that student might inform your instruction for the group and how what you do for the group is adapted to that kid or connects with that kid. So you, like an example, like you may want to say something like, let's say that your component is expecting you to do something about writing instruction. Many of these are about writing instruction. Just depends on your content area, but in a lot of them, it's about how well a student writes about your content. So let's say that you talk about how you provide kids, like I provide all of my students, I try to make sure that I have like authentic reasons to write, and I try to connect with their interests so that they want to write, or I give them a lot of choice so that they really feel like they're able to they're more interested in what we're writing about and find meaning with it. So you may want to say like some kind of a thing like that, but then say, so this student did blah, blah, blah with it. Like, because I did this for all students, this is what it looked like for this kid, if that makes sense. And there's some ways that you can weave in the evidence of how you establish those opportunities for all kids, but really what that looks like for this kid is what you're primarily assessed on. But you can weave in some of that, the balance, and talk about that tension a little bit, if that makes sense. And I'm going to mute for a minute in case I know Holly might have some other recommendations, or you all may have some thoughts or questions about this. I think this, for me, when I wrote this component, was one of the things I struggled with the absolute most. And I'll be honest. Okay, I'm going to tell you all, I hated writing this component. It was a monster for me for some reason. I had like mental blocks, but I ended up loving it the most when I was done and scoring the highest on this one. But there was something about this, and I think it all gets into this tension about the individual in the group. This was really hard for me to write about. But then once I figured it out, it fell together. But I put this one off and did it last because I was struggling with it so much. Okay, so there's a question. Should I talk about how this differentiation aligns with things I do for the class? When I see a correlation between the tension of one of my case study students and a portion of the class, should I talk about how his differentiation aligns with the things I do for the class?
That doesn't make sense, does it?
Well, can you clarify it a little bit?
Yeah, so for example, I'm trying to focus on writing for this specific student. So I've talked about, he showed ability here, but he rushed because he's bored easily, blah, 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 which I chose students who sort of were poster students of the different populations that I have, the ones that are really there because they want to be there, and the ones that are there because they thought, oh, this will be an easy A. So when I saw one of the skill assessments that I do, it really aligned with like half the class, the ones that are able but quickly bored and want a C, they just want to pass and move on with it. So I make adjustments for him, but should I also talk about how like essentially he is one of 7 that are like that? Should I bring in the class population, or just focus on him only in my discussion? Because I chose them.
When you describe him, you could say that there are things about him that, like, you have other students that have some of this too, or something. Like you could say that because, but then also, you want to talk about what makes them unique, and, they're not going to all, like, he won't have 7 clones, even though there's going to be 7 kids that are falling into some of those same behaviors.
Exactly.
You could talk about how you've learned, like the tricks you have in your bag for when you have a kid like that, the things that you've learned from experience. Mm-hmm. And maybe some of those tricks have worked with this kid, but some of them probably haven't. Right. And, I'm not sure if I'm explaining that super well.
Basically, just so that what I'm getting is that I shouldn't essentially talk about the other students as if they're just like him, but just say that he, like many others, got bored quickly with this assignment, so I differentiated in this way.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could just leave the other part out.
You don't have to put the others in for something like that. But okay. You may want to say when you start introducing him that 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 some of his behaviors are things you've seen before with kids, right?
Okay.
Like that he's that like he's a student that, you know, over the years you've had students that are, I'm not sure if I'm explaining this super well. Holly, I'm going to defer to you too.
Capable, but not necessarily interested in art or broadening their skill sets, or like he's just looking for a place to be a warm body for a few hours. You know, but he was. I mean, I think I've done a pretty good job of bringing him in the fold, but it wasn't his goal.
You're muted, Holly.
Do you want me to try to answer Courtney's question? All right. I tried to look it up and try to look at what you were talking about. And it's struggling, let's see. Reading and writing are so closely related. Okay, having a hard time separating. All right, so from what I read, it looked like you have two texts. One is a print text, just a story, something like that, that's print. And then one of the text is a non-print text. So like think media literacy, think, you know, a poster, a play that you watch, not that you read, something like that. Just, you can look up media literacy and that would give you some really good ideas, I think. So you use two texts that are different, and then you're submitting responses to that text. So it's not really focused on the writing as far as process writing with that, but it's their responses to the text. So the emphasis is more on how they interpreted the reading of those two texts. And then you also have two writing prompts that you are submitting. And then, so the writing is focused more on process kind of writing. And then it said that of the responses, the two responses to the text, one of the responses that you turn in from the students is also non-print. So that could be a non-print example of something that a student might do in response to a text would be a collage, a graph, some kind of drawing. I think you would ask, could it be like a poem, like a spoken word poem? It could, but you can't submit a video. They would have to write about what they did, is what it said. They would write about the response if it was on video or audio. Does that help, Courtney?
It does a little bit. It's one of the, I'm really struggling with that non-print. I don't know what the problem is. It's like I have this block in my brain. I've done the non-print as far as like looking at a piece of artwork and looking at the colors and those sorts of things to kind of.
Okay, so an example, like, of course, see, you're high school, I think, and I'm elementary. But in my mind, a non-print response to a piece of literature would be, we read Charlotte's Web, and then we did a project called Sketch to Stretch, where they actually draw the meaning of the story. Okay. So that tells me if they connected to an underlying theme of that book. And so I could interpret a lot from their response to that book through their drawing. So it's not just an illustration of the story, but it's an interpretation of the theme of the story.
Okay, and that's for one of them.
Yeah, that could be for one of them.
Okay, and then the other one, the non-print, could be what we talked about with looking at the colors from a picture and deciding what they see and analyzing for tone and mood. When they look at that image.
But then you mean, so one of the responses has to be non-print, but one of the texts has to be non-print.
Okay.
Could it be like music?
Yeah.
I'm just curious because I'm trying to think. I know someone who did actually, but it was for an elementary. It was the elementary literacy specialist, and she did something, and this was in the previous version of the assessment. But I know she also did something where students were watching a video of a cultural, like a traditional thing, and she intentionally chose something where the spoken language wasn't English so that they had to really analyze other aspects of
The
it.
list that they put, like, for example, for
Yes.
non-print text was film, work of art, photograph, recording, stage production.
Okay.
And see, my kids are doing all of those things with Romeo and Juliet, which we're fixing to start. But we're also going to be reading the text. Is that a problem?
It says, yes, it is, because it said it needed to be 2 different texts.
What I thought. Okay. Yeah, I'm still stuck on that one.
Well, as you get some more ideas, I'll put my phone number in the chat box. Feel free to call me and we could just talk about it, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Holly's a literacy expert, obviously, if she hadn't already mentioned that that's her area, one of the many.
Elementary, my dear.
But still, it's where it begins, right?
Right.
I'm elementary too. Actually, preschool, so sometimes pre-elementary. So I wanted to I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but recently was in a meeting where there was some conversation around some research from John Hattie. And John Hattie is actually known for, there are some studies around board certified teachers and how board certified teachers have some behaviors in their, that are more common amongst board certified teachers that he found to be deeper learning, that support deeper learning with students. But there's this other study that I wasn't aware of that talks about the difference between experienced teachers and expert teachers. And in this study, he talks about the behaviors of what makes someone an expert teacher. And what was really interesting is these are the same things that we're being asked to do with these components, especially, so I pulled ones that felt really connected to this component. So more respect for students, more responsive to students, better at predicting what will happen, including misconceptions. So when you all talk about, I've been doing this a while, and these are the kind of things that I normally see, like that's like being thoughtful about the things you normally see and expecting this is where they're probably going to have a problem, or when I ask this question, it's going to get to a misconception students have. Those are the kind of things that make you an expert. Analyzing and reflecting, not just after instruction, but during instruction. So when you're able to talk about, well, when I was doing this and the student was saying or asking this question, I realized that I had to change what I was doing. And thinking about how you improvise during the lesson is really important, that you can make those adjustments. The actual study is cited here if you're interested in that. But it also connects a whole lot to this idea of some of the things in the Green Book, what teachers should know and be able to do. And if you decide to download that PDF, another section that's really relevant to this component is pages 12 to 14, where it talks about recognizing individual differences in students and adjusting your practice accordingly. So there's some language around that in this section of it too. So I'm going to pause for a second and look at the chat box because we've got some questions coming in. Okay. Holly's on it. Never mind. I just want to make sure that the questions are answered. But the one thing about this study that I thought was especially interesting is, so this study is about how much impact teachers have on students. And so how it can be really important what kind of teacher you have, or what your teachers, that how much of a difference an expert teacher makes versus just an experienced teacher. And what was really interesting is they even looked at factors like a student's ability, their cognitive ability, And what they found to be the number one factor in this study on a student's performance was the feedback they get from a teacher. And that was higher than the student's ability, which was fascinating to me, that feedback was the most powerful single measure. And so part of this component in the rubric, they actually ask you about the kind of feedback you're giving your students. There's another quote from the page 18 of the What Teachers Should Know and Be Able to Do, where it talks about, by adding to their repertoire of assessment methods and by monitoring student progress regularly, accomplished teachers provide students, families, caregivers, and themselves with constructive feedback. So thought we could ask you all to share some of the ways that you provide your students, families, caregivers, and yourself feedback. Feel free to grab the mic if you don't want to use the chat box.
In math, I write all over their papers and sometimes show them exactly what I expected back. And then like part of this unit I'm using for my component 2, I actually brought some students to my desk individually and said, you know, this is what I was looking for, or well, it was about surface area and nets and all that. And I said, I just asked them a question. I said, how many rectangles am I supposed to see? And they would go, 6. And then I'd show them what they did and they were like, oh, and it kind of clicked with them. So I tried to give them some immediate feedback.
I have a conference table, and so after any kind of assessment or something, I pull the ones that I noticed needed some reteaching or something over to this conference table. And I always consider that one of my most powerful teaching moments, is because it's individualized to that student and I can get at whatever it was that they had trouble with right then.
Thank you, Holly. And then we've got some really great comments in the chat box. And in case people are listening to the recording later or can't see them now, I want to make sure that to call out some of those things. There's definitely this issue of parents and caregivers that's coming up. That can be really hard, especially I think the older the students get, that can be more challenging. So Courtney talks about giving students feedback using rubrics and modeling. And, you know, some good questions about how do we know what parents see. So Amy talked about using remind.com for both groups and individuals. Also a what stuck with you part on her door so that they can stick a comment of what worked or didn't for them on a Post-it and stick it as they leave. Exit slips, conferencing, which Holly had also talked about too. Sammy, addresses things. When she notices that a lot of students are struggling, she will address it as a group. But then also, even as a high school teacher, making contact with parents if she's noticing a student's falling behind, so that they can address it together. Shand has an idea about making an online gallery for student work. Courtney shows a low score, mid score, and high score piece, and then the rubric, so that they can really tease out which score each student should be given and why, so that they really understand those rubrics more. And Sammy talking about Google Classroom and websites for parents and kids to all be on the same page. Courtney gives regular ed and pre-AP students give her feedback every 9 weeks, which is super important. So also thinking about the feedback you get from your kids. And I think some of that could be like what they don't understand, which gives you some feedback about, like, you know, what may not have gone so great. But also reaching out to parents when a student is exceptional, good or bad. Writing about students every day in their planner for families to read. Sometimes talking to parents at drop off, giving kids immediate feedback verbally or with the error correction or reteach. I ask them to give me 2 positives and 1 area growth for each student. So that's, I'm sure, really helpful information that Courtney is seeking out. Let's see, group quizzes, students take a group quiz a day, then the next day they take the same quiz as the day before, but they take it in their lab groups. They don't know how they scored, what they missed. They aren't allowed to use notes, but they can talk to each other about what they know. Move between groups and listen to what they know. Accountable talk to work them through the problem without giving them the answers. So that really gives you a good glimpse of misconceptions. And send out targets and activities for the week to parents, so they have some discussion starters with their teens. Lots of really good ideas. Google Classroom can be another place that's mentioned there. I know it's been a while since I've actually had students. It's been a couple of years, but I used an app called Show Me, which is free, and you have to have it on an iPad. I don't think it works on phones or anything, but it's a free app where it's very much like what you see in Khan Academy, where you can have students draw or take pictures and write, and you don't see the kid in it, but you can see what they're writing or taking pictures of or drawing. And then you can record their voice describing it. So what I would often do is I had students, if they used a different math strategy or if they solved a problem a different way, they could record it using Show Me. And then I could text a link to that or email a link to their parents. And for my principal, she asked for student work regularly. I would often use the work that they recorded in Show Me, and I would make a QR code for her that would talk a little bit, describe it a little bit more, but then a QR code to where she could actually hear the kids describing it. And what I found about that app, now you have to understand that the intervention kids I served, what was really hard about doing math nights is that even as low as 3rd grade, I'd have parents come in with their students to a math night. And these are kids that are a couple of years behind in math, and the parents couldn't do the math that the kids couldn't do. So these are parents that have really serious math and school phobias and don't want to engage with games with their kids at home because they couldn't do the math themselves. So when I started to realize how hard and sad that was, and what was really going on in these homes, what was really nice about using this app where the kid was describing what they were doing, the parents were learning too how to do the math. But then they really got to hear, they loved hearing these kids that they thought, couldn't do math, describe this really neat way that they did the math and draw a picture of it and hear the confidence in their kid's voice. And the parents were really responsive to that because who doesn't like to hear their kid, you know? So you may want to think about using, it doesn't have to be that app, but you may want to really think about using technology in a way to hook those parents in. So maybe Shand, with your art, you could even have record part of a critique or something so that they can actually hear their voices describing why they did that piece or something like that. So, or what they thought went well with it or what they really struggled with. So, you know, and I can imagine that there would be really lots of applications for also recording students' voices and across other content, but that's a good idea, Courtney. I didn't even think about using that app for grading writing pieces. All right, great ideas. Thank you for sharing. The big trends that I noticed in the standards are the same trends that are in the big ideas from this component that are exactly the same as the big ideas that we go through the architecture of accomplished teaching. So it's knowing your students. You can't differentiate if you don't know who they are. Knowledge of your content and curriculum. Obviously, you have to know your content and curriculum to be able to make those adjustments. And what's really interesting about that, when you look, if you read more about that in your standards or in the Green Book, is that they talk a lot about the teachers who know their instruction the best and their content the best are able to make lots of connections to other content areas. So that's where you apply things to your student interest. So really having a real rich understanding of your content to the point where you can connect it to real life and to what the kids are interested in is super important. This instructional decision making, which we've been talking about a whole lot, and then of course reflective practice. And I'm going to let Holly talk about the marker papers, which is super exciting.
Well, this is a really underutilized resource. It's called the Kentucky Marker Papers. We used them a lot when we were doing writing portfolios that were scored. But what's really nice about this is that it gives you student work samples that are annotated. So you can locate the type of writing that you're having your student do and look for where you see them, like which marker paper looks the most like what your student is doing. And then if you're looking on the annotated ones, what will happen is it will have for you comments about what they're noticing in the paper, which those would be really great ideas for you when you're analyzing your own writings. But then down at the bottom, it always gives the next steps. So it's a really handy tool to help you with analysis of your students' writing and then thinking about what would be next for them in the natural progression of writing. So I don't know, will one of them open, Suzanne? Let's see.
Which one do you want me to click?
Just do one annotated, maybe personal writing. No, go up to, yeah, right there. And this is the P through 8, but there's also the 9 through 12.
It'll come. It's just going kind of slow, I think, because I'm running the meeting too.
Right. So just scroll on through there and get to an example so we can sort of see that continuum. So this is nice. Go back just a little bit. It shows the chart. Go back a little bit. Back just a little more. There's a chart that says beginning writer, and it gives the characteristics of the beginning writer, and then it like in these different areas. So these are some great things to hit when you're writing about idea development, organization, sentences, language, all of those kinds of things, audience purpose. So if you're, if you're just not sure what to hit on, these would be some great things to think about. then it gives you bullets as to like what a beginning writer looks like. And then what is the last? I can't see it. Let's see. What's the last column? I guess it's just a continued list. Organization, yeah. So it just gives you the characteristics. Then if you scroll on through those papers, you'll see then a developing writer, accomplished writer. So it kind of breaks it down so you see that continuum. And then throughout the whole set of papers, it will give you like real life examples of student writing. So when somebody looks at this writing, for example, here on page 4, go back, Suzanne, like on page 4, like if you look at that, you might just think, oh, that just looks like a bunch of scribbles. But somebody that really understands about writing and about children's development will see that it shows some evidence of directionality. They're starting to use some letter-like marks and, you know, those kinds of things. And then it'll tell you what's kind of next for them. So the next thing that you would want to think about is using correct letter formation, exploring how print looks, maybe doing some more work with directionality. So the marker papers are a set of things that will work K through 12. So I hope you take a chance to look at that, and maybe that will help you as you analyze your student work in writing. Mm-hmm. It's on the KDE website.
And we can also, I can go back and I can put the address in the chat box too, if you want to open that up now. Hold on. Whoops. Let me escape real quick so that I can copy and paste it easier. All right. And I just wanted to mention, I think that some of you are already thinking about this idea of how your kids also assess themselves. But you can use things like the marker papers for your students to self-assess too. So, you know, thinking about, I think I mentioned when I certified in this area, I was a preschool teacher, and that was when I learned about the marker papers, because I was fortunate to have a parent in my class who helped do this training at KDE. I had her son, and Cherry Boyles was a part of creating the marker papers and training people to use them at that time. And she really helped me to develop better into teaching students how to write and improve their writing. But at the time, and even now, like some of the very lowest examples in the marker papers, even though it says like preschool through 8, there wasn't a lot of examples that would have fallen into a preschool situation. So my classroom helped me make more that we could post. We posted them in our class, and we made like some books to help us to really analyze our own writing in preschool. So then we had them in the writing area. So when a kid would write something, they could look at the wall and say, my writing looks a lot like this one because I did this and I did this. And my next steps are this one, where I would be paying more attention to either like spaces between my words, or maybe I can do the first sound of a word, but I can't do the ending sound yet. So that's one of the things I'm going to really try to listen to next time. Or maybe my picture is a circle, and next time my circle will have details, which, you know, you're going to have a wide variety of things. But this, including your kids in this idea of these rubrics and this progression, is a really important aspect too. So thanks, Holly, for sharing that. Another question that I hear a lot when people are doing component 2 is, what students do I pick? And there's a whole lot of, you know, people will say, well, do I pick this one or this one or this one? And it's really hard to only talk about 2 kids. But the advice that National Board gives on this is make sure that you choose students who each pose a different instructional challenge. You're not going to write about, make sure that you choose kids that give you something to write about. So a kid that doesn't really need any adjustment would not be a kid you're going to write about. Think about kids that you're really wanting to figure out, that are a puzzle to you, and take advantage of this as a time to figure some of that out. And make sure that the examples that they give you, the samples, give you enough information to really analyze, so that you have work samples that are going to give you something to talk about. If you haven't already done this, and I think this really only applies to one person on this call, but if this is a component you haven't started doing yet, when you start collecting work samples, I highly recommend collecting at least twice as many as you have to submit, maybe 3 times as many, depending on how many kids you're expected to write about. So if you're doing 2, you may want to keep like 5 to 6 samples. If you have to do 1 kid, you may want to do 3 or 4 samples, 3 or 4 different kids, because you just never know who's going to move. And you also really never know what's going to happen. And you may be surprised that this kid is going to give you a whole lot to write about that you didn't think they would. So, things change in their lives, things change with their instruction and their circumstances. And you may want to make sure that you have those samples to do that. Because we live in a digital age, it's a lot easier to keep work samples now for kids than it used to be. So one idea that you could do is to just scan those anytime you have samples, and then drop them into folders for those students in Google or somewhere, so that you have a digital sample. But then I highly recommend also keeping some kind of a journal of your samples, so that you'll know why you chose that sample, and remind yourself, like, what was the instructional goal of this? What were you asking your kids to do with this sample? What did you do right before this to lead up to this? So how did you get the kid to this place? What are some important things you noticed during it? So, like, did this kid have a lot of questions? Were they really struggling? Had they had a bad day? Was their confidence level different? Was there something about this that you want to remember later so that you can write about it? And what are you going to do for this kid next because of what happened in this sample?
We were just talking about like how you might do some of that. And I was showing them the Tiny Scanner app that I have that's really helpful. So, you may have some kind of scanner app on your phone, but I think that's the easiest way to collect and to keep things organized.
Thank you for bringing that one up. And I think it's free. Tiny app, I'm pretty sure is free. I have it. I'm sorry, what were you saying? You're muted.
It's called Tiny Scanner, and it is free.
Sorry. Yeah. And you can even, I think it lets you do like photo quality or document quality, depending on what kind of samples you have. And you can even bundle them. So if it's like a 3-page, if you wanted to do 3 pages of samples and scan them all as one doc, and just, you can do it lots of different ways and email them to yourself. Thank you for that tip, Holly. Holly, do you want to talk about these questions?
Yes, and you may be thinking, oh, great, all I need more questions to answer, because you have all those questions to answer in your component. But I want to just kind of challenge you to look at these questions in your general portfolio instructions. It's it's the general one, not the one for your component, but it says components 2, 3, and 4 on it. You need to print this off also. There's a lot of great information in this. These questions are listed when you're trying to analyze work. So I would suggest doing this like with a cup of coffee, just kind of jotting things down, kind of informally, answering these questions about your students, about the student work, about a video if you're working on that one. But what's good, it's kind of, look at it as maybe a pre-writing assignment, just to get you thinking in the right direction. I think it will color your answers when you go to answer your component directions. And what it does is it kind of reminds you and sort of plants seeds in your brain about what National Board values in the analysis process. So these are on page 19, and I won't read through all of them. I think it would be really worth doing. Maybe even if you just get with somebody else and you talk through them. But I think it would be a really valuable experience to get you ready to write your component. Then I think on the next slide, there are some more questions on page 40, 41, and 42, questions about the assignment. And I mean, you have to write about the assignment in this one, questions about their responses, questions to guide your interpretation, and then questions to guide reflection. So a lot of the questions are very similar to the ones you'll see in your component, but they might be worded a little bit differently and just help you start thinking in the right direction when you're answering your actual component directions. Has anyone already used these?
Can you guys see this? Okay, I've kind of drug it over. Whoops.
But
I
look
did.
at these two.
I
I mean, you
lost it.
don't have to answer these formally. I don't want you to think that you're getting more questions to answer. These are like, it's like exercises to help you analyze better. Because that's when just talking to people that are scorers for National Board, a lot of times people will describe instead of analyze, or they will not go deep enough in their analysis. And I think this will really help you hit that, because you're talking about misconceptions that you see, and you're talking about what they did correctly, what they didn't, it just really breaks it down a little bit more than the questions in the component.
And this is also where they ask you some really interesting questions. Like in this second activity, it's even things like, how does each student's response fit into what you already know about the student's understandings and performance? And it even, it says be really specific. And then it asks you to do things like, in 2 sentences for each student, describe what each learned from this assignment, judging from the responses. And that's a really good practice to try to only capture that in 2 sentences. And I mean, it has some really great questions for each of these activities that Holly highlighted.
Yeah, and that huge, like, why? Why did you choose that strategy? Like, really think about it. Why that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yay, more work.
And it even has like, what was your feedback strategy for each of these students? So it's going to force you to think about the things they're looking for. Okay, so Amy, what I'm going to do, I'm going to screen share this so that you guys can see it. So let me drag over my National Board website, which is also, it's open to the Green Book. All right, hold on. Let me go to, oops. It's in my favorites, but okay. If we go to board certified teachers, when you go to the For Candidates tab, and the first time and returning candidates, which you guys probably go here lots of times to get your stuff, there's a few different places to find the general portfolio directions. And I think the easiest thing to do is to click on this table where they have the instructions for each certificate area, but you can see it's right here, hyperlinked in the description at the top. It's also hyperlinked here. I know several of you mentioned that you're doing components 3 and 4 also. There's some really helpful guidance in here around the videotape and analyzing your videotape. And then some tips on how to write about your instruction for general. But this is also where you're going to have some important things about like how to format your evidence for electronic instruction. But the questions in here are really helpful. And and Holly pointed out the ones around analyzing student work, they start on page 39. The other questions that she pointed out that are really helpful were in this writing around teaching section. So make sure you look in this document. There's a lot of really helpful guidance.
This document also has a lot of definitions. So if you're wondering,
right.
what does National Board mean when they say this?
Yeah, actually, there's a whole glossary that's really helpful. Like, now I'm struggling to. Sorry, I'm zooming through this. Here they are. So it talks about like, what is an assignment? What does it mean by site? What does it mean by class? What does it mean by content? What does it mean by, people ask all the time about instructional unit. That's defined in here. Instructional sequence, instructional materials, like all of that is defined in these terms. So if you're really struggling to know what do they mean by a lesson, what are they, oh, here's non-print text. So, and print text is defined. So these definitions can be really helpful for you all. And those are also in this document. All right. Oops. The last thing that we wanted to mention, and in some ways we should have begun with it because it's helpful when you're with your students to begin with the end in mind and to always know what rubric or what assessment you're going to be measured by. And this is the rubric you're going to be measured by. This is your end, okay? So it's going to look a little different based on your certificate area. There will be some specific things perhaps called out that won't be in here for everyone, or some specific things around your content area. But the really big things are that you can recognize individual differences in students and set high, worthwhile, and appropriate goals for each kid that you can effectively differentiate. You engage students in meaningful exploration of important ideas, and you develop their thinking. You give rich and varied assignments. You foster their students' responsibility for their own development. So how are you enabling them to be much more involved with their own learning process? Accurately describe, analyze, and evaluate students' work. And it says detailed and in-depth. And provide feedback to students. So there's that feedback thing again. And that you have an insightful reflection. So that rubric you'll have listed in your directions. The one I'm looking at, it's on page 15. So yours will probably be around that same page. But that a level 4 will be clear, consistent, and convincing evidence of all of these things. So sorry, Holly had to hop off without us being able to say goodbye to her. She's kind of wearing double hats today. She's helping with a meeting, a candidate meeting in Paducah right now too. But I wanted to let you all know that Holly has a really great feedback survey that just helps us to know, that we'll send to everyone with the recording, that just helps us to know if you have ways that we can improve webinars like this in the future, or if there's topics that you want covered in the future that would be a new webinar, or if you have some very specific questions about your content area. We can also, if they come up later, then if you put them in the survey, then we can also respond to those there. And we also have some videos that we've been also trying to create that are short, to answer short questions. And to be honest, we haven't been able to make any new ones lately because we've been focused on trying to lead a lot of in-person and webinars around the components right now. So we haven't added to those right now. But in the same space where you would have registered for this, the same website, which is kynt3.org, I'm going to open it up so you can see it. There's a couple of other things on here I wanted to bring to your attention that are on different pages within that website. It's okay. So when you go to the KYNT3 .org website. There is some candidate support links. One is these getting started videos and resources. And these are helpful with like just an overview of the process, timelines of the process, kind of how to create an account, how to choose a certificate area, some eligibility and timelines. These are more for people that are not candidates yet. And in the future, we're going to have some overview things about how to read your standards and how to download your directions. And then we have the webinars. So in the same place where you've registered, the links to the recordings to those webinars will also be posted here. And we've already done one for components 4 and 3. If you're interested in watching those, they're here. And the other thing I wanted to mention is if you are a if you're a candidate in a school that doesn't already have any board certified teachers, there is a reimbursement that we have to help pay for part of your component. It's a one-time only reimbursement, and it's a $150 reimbursement, and there's information here on how to apply. There's an application and a Q&A listed here. So even if you are not in this camp and you know somebody who is, please encourage them to apply for that incentive. It's listed under the Innovator Incentive application, because we want to really make sure we have a legislative goal in Kentucky that we will have at least one board certified teacher in every school by 2020. So we're doing what we can to try to make that happen, to provide better equity for students in Kentucky. And just wanted to open it up for other questions. I'm also going to put, Holly is often much faster at responding to emails than I am. So I'm putting hers in here, and I'll also put mine. My email actually didn't work for 3 days last week, which is very frustrating, but I'm caught up right now on emails. But I am traveling a lot this week and next, so that slows down my response time a little bit. But if you have any other questions or comments, I'm going to stop recording because this is often where we'll get into some specifics that might not apply to the whole group, and some people may not want to ask their questions to the whole group. And I will email this out to everybody that registered too. So thank you all for joining, and